So was Jon Scheyer actually outcoached against Kentucky, or were there other reasons why the Duke Blue Devils fell just a little bit short against the Wildcats?
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. It's so great to have you here with us on Thursday, November 14th, 2024. Locked On Blue Devils is your one-stop shop where we discuss everything going on in the life of Duke athletics, talking a lot about Duke men's basketball following their Champions Classic loss against Kentucky on Tuesday night in Atlanta, 77-72, the final score in that one. Our friend Ben McCormick, the creator of Duke Wisdom, is back on the show today. We're going to unpack everything that there is to regarding the show, including the shooting performance from the Duke basketball team, a look into head coach Jon Scheyer, some of the injury issues that were there, and so much more throughout the course of today's show. If you have not done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating and written review. Like this video if you're watching us on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as we continue to grow this Locked On Blue Devils community. So Duke falls 77-72 against Kentucky, their first loss of the season. Duke had a 9-point lead at halftime, as we unpacked on yesterday's show. Goes 1 for 11 from three-point range in the second half, 4 of 23 on the game, just an abysmal shooting performance. And now there's chatter out there about Jon Scheyer and whether or not he was outcoached by Mark Pope in this one. Duke only playing 8 rotation players, and I can't quite go there. We put out on Twitter a poll at LO_Blue Devils. What was the most significant factor in Duke's loss to Kentucky? Gave a couple of options, whether it be the poor shooting performance, turnovers in the second half, injuries down the stretch, or coaching decisions, and 53% of you said that it was the poor shooting performance, and I certainly do agree in that. I think that there was a statement or a move by some Duke fans to see more players get in on the action in that game against Kentucky, and I think that's certainly a fair starting point with the discussion, but I'm not going to go all the way to saying that Jon Scheyer was outclassed. Ben McCormick from Duke Wisdom's here with us to unpack that and more on the show. Thanks for being here, Ben. Where do you sit on the notion that Jon Scheyer was outcoached in the Champions Classic?
Yeah, thanks for having me, JJ. I don't buy that argument at all. I think Jon did a fine job. I think Duke got a lot of similar shots that they got against Maine and against Army. They just weren't able to drop in this one. And I think that I know that there was a lot of chatter about wanting Darren and wanting Isaiah to play in this one, but I don't know if there was any moment in that game in which I would have felt comfortable putting either of them in there. I mean, Kentucky's a team full of 21, 22-year-olds. And frankly, if Isaiah Evans isn't getting minutes against Maine, there's something keeping Jon from trusting him, especially, I think, defensively in a game like that. I don't think that it would have alleviated any of the stress on those players, really. I think they probably would have come in for about 30 seconds and then had to come right back out or something similar to that. I don't think that would have been a fix. But ultimately, I do think it was the poor shooting, a little bit of the youthful decisions out there on the court, and that has nothing to do with Scheyer. I think he made the right call to give the ball to Cooper Flagg at the end of the game. But he's 17 years old, and maybe for the first time it showed. 1
turnover in the first half for the Duke basketball team, 6 in the second half. And again, they were just time and time again were not able to make shots from the outside in this one. And so not much that the head coach can do in that spot. I guess there is the case to bring somebody off the bench and that sort of thing. But to your point, if these guys aren't really playing against Maine and against Army and getting significant run in those games, what's the move there to play it in a game against Kentucky? Maybe that is a play in the future that he makes. I think a lot of it you could talk about. Coach K was never a guy that in that spot would have turned to Darren Harris and Isaiah Evans. And for better or worse, there's still his DNA in the coach that Jon Scheyer is today. And Coach K is the winningest coach of all time. So maybe he knows a thing or two in a moment like that. That's why I can't just simply put this out to Jon Scheyer being outcoached in this one. I think there were other factors that were in play. The loss still stings nonetheless, right? You play this game
Yeah.
several more times. I think Duke beats Kentucky a good number of them. But in that second half, there were more factors than just simply the head coach of Duke being outcoached.
Yeah, I think that John's gonna catch a lot of flack because obviously with Coach K, if something went awry, the championships were there to fall back on. Like fans weren't just gonna jump all over Coach K for anything, especially those latter years of his career. But for John, there's no besides maybe the ACC championship in his first year, there's not a lot to fall back on at the moment. So it's easy to jump on a young coach. I think you see that at every level. Any young coach, they get jumped on. Are they actually a good coach? You know, this and that. I think the way that John wants to play the game, he wants to seek a lot of threes being shot. The play style that he's going for, they pulled it off. And for the vast majority of that game, they looked like they were going to win that game. I really had very few that they were going to win for most of the game. And I think that really it just boiled down to they couldn't make shots in big moments. But then also I think it boiled down to Cooper Flagg didn't have a lot of help. And if there is one critique I have of the way they went about the end of the game, it's probably that Tyrese Proctor played a pretty good game, I think. And he was uninvolved in the offense there at the end of the game. And so one thing I could have changed, it'd probably be to let Tyrese help Cooper out a little bit.
I want to get to Tyrese in just a little bit because that's a great point that you make there in that one. I think when we talk once again a little bit more about what we saw from Jon Scheyer and this team in the second half, he's not the guy out there taking these shots and getting those open looks. Duke's defense kept them in the game for the entire portion of the game. And to your point, Duke was on their way to a victory. The box score says as much. Duke had the lead for over 27 minutes in this one. Kentucky just led it for 7. The game was tied for 5. There's your 40-minute game all added up in one. I mean, when you look at those numbers and you hear it in that perspective, it stings a little bit to know that, maybe those shots down the stretch and turnovers, again, not a result of Jon Scheyer handling the basketball himself, one of the bigger reasons why Duke lost this one.
Yeah, I think I like the point about the turnovers. You can't blame John for that. And I think that there's some people even that didn't like seeing Cooper Flagg play what you could call hero ball there at the end of the game. But I think when you have a player that for the most part was successfully taking on Kentucky and scoring on his own a lot of possessions there, and Coach K sort of set the precedent of you take your best player, you put the ball in his hands at the end of the game. You know, for better or for worse, you look at Grayson Allen, he hit the shot in 2016, and then Coach K continued to give him the ball the rest of his career at the end of games. That didn't work out so well in 2018 on several occasions, actually. But I think that's the right call. I think there was no one else that should have had the ball at the end of the game. I think a 17-year-old just made the wrong decision with the ball. And that's where I think maybe Tyrese Proctor would come in, more of a veteran guy that he could have set that up a little better and he could have aided with it.
Where are we at with Tyrese Proctor 3 games into the season? We'll break down a little bit more of his game against Kentucky and more after we take timeout number 1 here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Stay with us. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and there's no better time to get in on the NFL action than right now. Tonight, Thursday night football between the Eagles and the Commanders, a big one in the NFC East. 2 frontrunners right now in the NFC. Philadelphia favored by 3 right now, according to FanDuel. And new customers can bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get in a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch or make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and a proud sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. Back on the program here today, JJ Jackson, joined by my good buddy Ben McCormick of Duke Wisdom. We're talking about the basketball game played between Duke and Kentucky on Tuesday night, a 5-point win for the Wildcats over the Blue Devils. Tyrese Proctor for Duke in Tuesday night's game finishes with 12 points on 4 of 9 shooting, 2 of 5 from three-point range in 36 minutes of competition. He played all 20 minutes of the second half. He, Cooper Flagg, and Con Knippel played all 20 minutes of that second half, but just 2 shot attempts in the second half for Tyrese Proctor when it looked like, Ben, he had his shot falling. I mean, no points scored there from the floor in the second half for Tyrese Proctor. That was interesting to me to not see the ball in his hands.
Yeah, I've been a pretty big advocate for Tyrese throughout the season. I know there's a lot of people who've hated on Tyrese, both Duke fans and non-Duke fans, that they don't think he's been up to par throughout his career, throughout the season. But what I've seen from him in the early season is that he is clearly the best scoring like true backcourt player. I look at Con, he's sort of a small forward hybrid player. And I think that he's done a terrific job, and I think the ball should be put into his hands more in scoring situations, because I truly believe he's a guy that's capable of 14, 15 points a night. And I think he was a guy capable of over 20 against Kentucky if he had the ball in his hands and shot the ball more. And I think that's been an issue for Tyrese his whole career, is he kind of falls back in the moment, doesn't take a lot of shots. That's a criticism that I've had of him in the past. And I think, unfortunately, maybe he fell victim to that again. I look at those same shooting splits there from Caleb Foster, 2 of 9, 0 of 4 from 3. Caleb had a rough game, and Caleb has had a little bit of a rough time to start the season. And I think there were some people that expected him to be taking more of the offensive burden than Tyrese. I was not one of those people. I expected Tyrese to kind of step up in big moments like this. And I wish that he had been given the opportunity, or perhaps it was that he didn't seize the opportunity. But either way, I wish that he had kind of shown that he could be the guy at the end of a game, because he is the most tenured player on this roster.
Yeah, the offensive equation here for Duke is interesting, because you've got Cooper Flagg and Con Knippel who are leading the way offensively through these first couple of games for Duke. And I'm not advocating for that to change by any stretch. They've been awesome to start the season. But with those other players in mind, the Caleb Fosters, Tyrese Proctors of the world, Sion James is out injured. He's an option there that was being rather aggressive in a couple of drives that he had there to the rim. Mason Gillis, not really the guy that's going to be out there trying to look for his shot too much, wants to be an option for the ball handlers and that sort of thing. But when you look at this box score and we see 20 shot attempts for Con Knippel, and we see 1 of 8 from 3, at a certain point, can Tyrese Proctor, the junior, go get the basketball in some ways and kind of be that guy that tries to settle this down as an experienced player?
Yeah, I think
who is seeing his shots fall in the game. Sorry to cut you off there, but who is seeing his shots fall?
I think we talked about those missed threes earlier, in the episode, and I've seen a lot of people posting these clips of the guys shooting these uncontested threes and these missing all these shots, and they're going, well, it was kind of out of our hands. But I think when you look at Con, that 1 of 8 number is pretty jarring. I mean, 12.5% from 3 for who is qualified as a really, really good shooter. I think some of those shot attempts by Con were good looks in theory that a young player rushed, that he would come off a screen and he shot them far too quickly. He shot them off balance. And so I'm going to be a little bit critical of his shot taking, not because they were bad selections, but that he just didn't square up for him. And maybe that's first game in a big stage in college basketball, that he just wasn't quite himself. And I think that if you recognize that as an older player, maybe you stop depending on him quite as much as usual. Not that he doesn't still need the ball in his hands, but I think I think you're right. There gets a point in that game in the second half where you go, okay, it's not Con's night.
Yeah.
Whose night is it?
Yeah. Early in the second half, when it's a bit more efficient for Con Knippel, he's making a couple of moves. He's got some free throw line kind of turnaround jumpers that are like pro moves. And you're hearing Jay Billis on the broadcast break it down as such. But the second half continues. Shots aren't falling. Con Knippel, also a guy who played all 20 minutes of the second half, and it really looked like down the stretch he was feeling that burden a little bit, Ben.
Yeah, it definitely, you can definitely tell, I think, from some of these guys that they were a little bit gassed. They could not handle this kind of level of action quite this quickly in their career. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that Kaman was out with that cramping for so much time, and Sion with that shoulder injury. And so, yeah, and that's where the argument for playing Isaiah and Darren comes in,
For
because
sure.
these guys look a little bit gassed. I didn't think they looked gassed enough for them to still not be able to compete. I think Cooper Flagg looked a little tired, but he was still, up until that final minute of the game, going strong,
doubt.
getting buckets, putting the team on his back. So I think you go with the guys that are proven, but I am interested to see how conditioning, and a lot of that conditioning goes into maybe preventing these cramping issues. I'm interested to see how that develops as we go.
It's certainly going to be something to follow with the Duke basketball team. A loss to Kentucky. Now they turn to Wofford, and then some other big non-conference games still to come. Defensively, I think you got to be pleased with what you're seeing so far from the Duke basketball team. Let's talk about that and a little bit more after we take one more break here on today's episode. Locked On Blue Devils brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the best place to go and find tickets to see your favorite teams play. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that filters out the fluffs to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time Picks makes curation so much easier to save more on sports, concert, comedy events, theater, and so much more. Toggling the all-in pricing feature will show the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. I love the seat views that you can have, where you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time, a proud sponsor of Locked On Blue Devils. All right, here we go. Locked On Blue Devils, JJ Jackson with Ben McCormick talking about Duke basketball's loss to Kentucky 77-72. The Wildcats came in as a really good three-point shooting team. They shot the ball really well to open up the game, and their final percentage even really impressive for this Kentucky team. However, going into the game, when you look at what they had done offensively, for the first time since 1978, Kentucky scored 100-plus in their first two games to open the season. They scored just 77 against Duke. I, again, was impressed by what we saw defensively from the Duke basketball team, because they were punched early in this one, starting 5 for 5 from three to Kentucky, and Duke didn't back down.
Yeah, I think this team has proven that they're one of the better defensive teams that we've seen in a long time. I think from top to bottom, all these guys can defend at least at some level. And they're impressive, especially because of how young they are and how well they're handling their defensive assignments. And the other part of that is that Kentucky is so much better than that number 19 beside their name. I suspect next week they will be well in the top 10, if not pushing 5. So I think that I'm impressed with the way they handled it. Like you said, such a hot start by Kentucky. It would be easy for a young team to roll over at that point and say, what can you do? If a team's going to hit that well from three, you just can't win a basketball game. But I think that Duke's got a mental toughness to them this season, that despite their youth, they refuse to lose easily. Yes, they lost, but that defense is going to keep them in pretty much any game. I think that you're going to be hard-pressed to blow Duke out, and I think the proof is in this game. You shoot the ball that poorly, the other team shoots it that well, yet you're still in a position to win that game with just seconds left on the clock. I think that proves to me that the way this Duke team plays, they refuse to go out without a fight.
Also, look, the turnovers plagued Duke in the second half, but just 7 for the game, 1 in the first half, in which you have a 9-point lead. Duke's done a really nice job of protecting the basketball through these first games, and we've seen it year after year. You can look across the league and see this as well, Ben. When you turn the basketball over a lot, you give up a lot of looks in transition. Not only are they scoring in those opportunities, but you're also, defense gets frazzled a little bit trying to get reset. And so credit on the offensive end of the floor for Duke, that in a game where their shots weren't falling, at least they were taking the shots, and at least there weren't so many turnovers that you're putting your defense then at a disadvantage, and you are able to get back and get set up.
Yeah, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. I mean, I think in the last couple of days, I've thought a lot about that 2019 Champions Classic game. So that Trey Jones, Vernon Carey team, they played Kansas. And that was one of the ugliest games I've ever seen two top 5 teams play. I mean, there were, I don't even remember how many turnovers there were, but there were a lot. I think Kansas had over 20. And so if you're in a high quality game like that, you don't want to shoot yourself, and you want to be able to stay afloat. You have to put yourself in positions to win. And I think Duke did that. And that's why it's difficult to complain but so much about this loss, because ultimately they did the things to put themselves in a position to win. They did the correct things. They just didn't pan out. And I think that's what makes it a little difficult to swallow, is when you go, well, we played a good game but didn't win. And that's always tough to process.
Okay, so now Duke didn't win this game. Flush it, move on to the next one, ready to take on Wofford on Saturday. First opportunity for us to see what a Duke team looks like this season, coming off a loss. A lot of these young players experiencing their first loss within college basketball. Wofford is not the scariest of opponents at all, but I do think it's an important game for Duke, knowing what's coming up next, knowing the tough stretch of competition that you've got. 3 out of your next 5 games are against Arizona, Kansas, and Auburn, 3 of the toughest teams in the sport so far.
Yeah, well, I think this Wofford the first half of this game is going to be a little bit of a trap. I think Duke, outside of maybe the Kentucky game, has not looked its best in first halves this year. And Wofford is a deceptively decent team. Like, they're honestly going to contend to win their conference. They're a team that you might see in the NCAA tournament. So this is a quality game, and I'm kind of glad that they didn't bounce off a loss in the incarnate word. I don't know how much you learn about yourself in a game that's probably a 40 or 50-point win. But this is one that I could see if Wofford plays a good game, and I think it's dependent on that. If they play a good game, this is a game that could be uncomfortably close for longer than Duke wants it to be. And so fight through that uncomfortableness. That's all about bouncing off a loss. Fight through that, see what you're made of. And then if they get that win, which hopefully they would against Wofford, if they get that win, yeah, you're heading into a really, really tough stretch, where I think that, and I said something, I posted something about having your back against the wall, which might not be the greatest wording of it, but I think you don't like having this loss heading into 3 really high caliber top 10 teams, because now you feel like almost, well, we've got to win it like at least 2 out of 3 of these, because 2 out of 2, you can live with that. It's not preferred, but you can live with that. But if you come out of it 1-3, or forbid 0-4, your seeding in March is not going to like that stretch of play.
Right, knowing that the ACC is going to be tough to get through game after game after game throughout the course of the season. That's a great point there in that one. So with what we know from this Duke team, seeing it already a couple of games this season, the uncertainty with Sion James' injury and his availability going into a game like this on Saturday, I think this is the opportunity to stretch the rotation out just a little bit, make the mind up. Is it Darren Harris? Is it Isaiah Evans? Maybe a spell of both, but probably for the betterment of the team, just one of those guys, knowing that you're going to want that bench to be a little bit shorter, traditionally looking at Duke basketball. So I think in this Wofford game, it's a great chance for those guys to make strides. It feels like on the defensive end of the floor for all of these freshmen, that's going to be one of the bigger things that keeps you off, because we certainly know Darren Harris and Isaiah Evans know how to score the basketball.
Yeah, I think that Isaiah is a guy that, he can go get you a bucket in any sort of way you want him to go get a bucket. The reservation is always, I think, defensively with Isaiah. For Darren, I think there's a similar reservation. But I think that if you're in another high-quality game, I think you're right. Let these guys get some run against Wofford, see what they're made of. And then maybe if you find yourself in a similar position against Arizona or against Kansas, where these threes just aren't falling, you're just back rim on everything. Darren Harris is a guy that I would be like, okay, throw him in there for 4 minutes. Let him shoot the ball twice at least from 3. See if he makes them.
Yep.
If he makes them, great. He might make 4 of them. And he feels a lot like an Alex O'Connell back in the day. who could come in and do absolutely nothing, or he could come in and hit 4 3-pointers, and now you're in a position to win this game. Joey Baker was very similar. A guy like that you know what he can do, and he can do it well. And so I think there's a chance that if you let him get a little more run against Wofford, games like that, see if he can hang defensively with teams like that, then you'll feel a little more comfortable putting him in a position.
Ben, the conversation has been awesome here today. Really excited to see what's next for the Duke basketball team, and hopefully we've got more and more wins coming. We'll have more visits with you here on the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. But tell us about Duke Wisdom and how people can best support you.
Yeah, so you guys can check out Duke Wisdom, the Duke Wisdom podcast. You can just give it a search. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. You can go to dukewisdom.org, read some articles. I'm dipping my feet into photography right now at women's basketball. So
let's go.
Check out some of that, and definitely make sure to tune into the podcast and listen to the new co-host Clinton Weaver and I cut it up about Duke.
It's going to be great. We'll be sure to do that. Ben, thanks for the visit. We'll do it again soon, okay?
Yeah, thanks, JJ.
All right, that's Ben McCormick joining us here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Really appreciate his perspective and thoughts on what happened with the Duke game against Kentucky. Again, pump the brakes once again on the kind of anti-Jon Scheyer chatter that might be out there. Really excited to talk more about Duke athletics in the days and weeks to come. Thanks so much for making Locked On Blue Devils your first watch and first listen here today. That'll do it for today's show. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.